Hello, my name is Abrianna Wright, and I will be teaching you about the recent controversies of the Apollo Sauroktonos, or Lizard Slayer, attribution to Praxiteles. Alright, so this piece was widely known and replicated many times over. It was considered a major work of the 4th century by the sculptor Praxiteles and inspired numerous Roman marble replicas and gems as representatives of this piece as well. How the statue of the young Apollo taunting a lizard came to achieve iconic status in the history of art is rooted in various discussions and evidence based on its history, science, and documentation. The controversies begin with the first known documentation of the piece and the history that follows it. First, let's take a look at what the Apollo Sauroktonos is. The identification and description of the Apollo Sauroktonos was based solely on a passage in the book Natural History by Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder wrote this book 400 years after Praxiteles was alive and wrote this in Latin. In Book 34, Pliny has a chapter devoted to metals, including nearly 20 bronze sculptures supposedly by Praxiteles. He mentions that Praxiteles, who excelled more particularly in marble, also executed some very beautiful works in brass. Pliny gave a full description of the bronze statues, so it was not difficult to identify. He stated, Praxiteles also made a young Apollo with an arrow awaiting a lizard as it creeps up, which they called Lizard Slayer. It was known to be made of bronze. The statue was said to be the epitome of Praxiteles' style, and also is easily distinguished because of the unfamiliar iconography that could not be related to any other specific cult of Apollo. The description from Pliny, being the only written description known to date, has been a resource for many art connoisseurs and art historians to understand the imagery of Apollo slaying a lizard. This image was first identified in the 18th century Rome, Baron Philip von Stoch, being carved on an ancient intaglio and on many ancient glass pastes in the von Stoch collection. These pieces were described to depict a youthful nude male leaning on a tree that has an oversized lizard crawling on its trunk. The boy was leaning on his left leg and holds what might be an arrow in his right hand. German archaeologist and art historian Johann Joachim Winkelmann associated this miniature image with a life-size marble statue representing the same subject in the Borghese collection in Rome. He published the history of the art of antiquity, which included various Roman marble replicas and coinage of the Apollo Sauroktonos. Few scholars have doubted the identification of this statue type because of this important text. Though it is known that these coins and copies exist of the Apollo Sauroktonos through ancient artifacts, we are still unsure of which piece could be the original. In Pliny's writing, there is no mention of the patron who originally commissioned the piece, nor its location as of the time Pliny documented this, which has now led up to the current controversy over if the original still exists and is preserved today. There are two recent events that have made a re-evaluation of Pliny's attributions to Praxiteles and the identification of the statue type timely. One is the Cleveland Museum of Art claiming that their life-size bronze statue of Apollo Sauroktonos type is Praxiteles' bronze original statue. The second event is the first ever monographic exhibition devoted to the sculptor Praxiteles and actively did not include the Cleveland bronze because of the issues raised over the questionable provenance and where it was from. In 2004, the Cleveland Museum of Art claimed that their life-size bronze statue was not only ancient, but the original that Praxiteles made himself. They based this claim off of Pliny's description alone, focusing on the composition. This is problematic for a couple reasons. We must also consider the history, iconography, and style of the piece. According to the scientific report on the metallography of the sculpture, composition alone cannot decipher if a piece is from a specific period. While containing stylization of a piece can bring a certain assumption to the time period, The lack of evidence as to where it was and when it was created invalidates the absolute certainty of this piece. In natural history, Pliny also included multiple works said to be from the 4th century but have been proven to be dated inaccurately. This has led to further questioning on if this piece was truly from this time period. Alongside historically dated evidence, we must also look at the historical iconography used in this piece. The lizard slayer is portrayed as a child who does not follow the norms of a classical representation of divinities. The lizard is often associated with death, but never as a threatening creature in Greek history. So, the actions of an adolescent god slaying a lizard would be a humorous, childish prank, which would never typically be a subject of a classical art piece. Lastly, we must consider the style. While this composition was ridiculed for not including enough information to connect a piece to a period, the Apollo did indicate that it could stray from certain periods because of how it was stylized. The pose and unusual hairdo are more closely related to the Hellenistic period than the mid-4th century Greece. According to the Apollo Sauroktonos, redefined by Jennifer Niels, the S-curve pose, pioneered by Praxiteles, is a fairly stable posture with the feet apart and planted on the ground. The Sauroktonos statue, in contrast, presents an excessively leaning pose, which is both revolutionary and inherently unstable. Many scholars have argued that this pose of the Sauroktonos type is too advanced for the mid-4th century BCE. As well as the pose, the youthful Apollo's long, middle-parted hair with the headband is also considered to be a style of Hellenistic period and not style used for godlike figures in Greek history. Now, I want to ask you, would you display this bronze piece? And do you believe the Cleveland Art Museum when they say it was the original? Let me know in the comments. Thank you. Here are my references. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.